If you had to buy a truck, a half ton or a 3/4 ton, what would you buy?
Oh man, I could not buy a relatively new truck. I mean, especially what the diesel market has suffered now with emissions control devices. So I'm someone that would need a diesel for towing. I like to tow my race car, my drive about fun street car, out to road courses, circle tracks, the drag strip, and I need to tow. And the diesel market has suffered so much from all of this, far worse than the gasoline engine market, and the gasoline market is doing quite poorly. So if you haven't researched that diesel market all that much, it's really quite bad.
Yeah.
I honestly would have to go back to an older vehicle. I try and find something that doesn't have any frame rust or rot, something that doesn't have terrible body rust or rot. Get both of those in great shape, replace all the, I'm sure, rotted out brake lines, fuel lines, etc., and find a truck that doesn't have too much overly control module operated systems. And I'd get something probably early 2000s, possibly, and just maintain or fix everything I can pretty much powertrain wise, which usually isn't much. And I'd go that route. I couldn't do a new vehicle. What have you heard from other people? I'm curious.
It's tough because a lot of people I talk to are other YouTubers that are buying brand new trucks all the time because they get a write-off. So they Section 179 the write-off, and that's
Sure.
they just want to save the money and they don't want to pay the government. And I understand that. But I think people are getting to be apathetic about the whole situation. They're like, well, what do I buy? They don't want to buy something that's out of warranty. Most people can't fix their cars like I can, and they just don't want the hassle. So they buy something that's in warranty and they risk it and they say, well, I hope I'm not one of the 10 to 15% that have a catastrophic problem. And if I'm not, great, then I'll cycle it at 60,000. That's what I see people doing all the time. And they just roll negative equity in every time they go to the dealer.
You're absolutely right. And it hurts me to see that. But that's really where things are going, especially with vehicles where you've had a huge client base that is just leasing and accustomed to just getting rid of the vehicle in 3 years. They're almost creating, in that sense, a disposable car market, and it's quite sad.
Yeah. Yeah. It's driven used car prices up. I've noticed since I think there's been a lot more videos like mine recently in the last couple of years on YouTube and other formats, people kind of blowing the whistle on this whole trend. And that has been driving up used car prices, especially for Toyotas. I mean, you see, gosh, I was looking for a 4Runner for my son, a 2010 4Runner with 220,000 miles on it cost minimum of $13,000, which is crazy.
But that
For
that was a great vehicle, honestly.
yeah,
Um,
five
I
speed.
would absolutely take something like that because they were, you know, in my opinion, one of the last great products, especially from Toyota, who we can both agree has had a stellar reputation in the past. I mean, Toyota really wanted to come into the American market many years ago and, in a sense, do their best to take it over. And I applaud them. They really created quite a few excellent products. I would take a truck like that. I'd go back even further to a cruiser. Those were also great trucks, for a great span of time too. I mean, have you ever had like a Land Cruiser?
I have not. No, I've only I've seen a couple for sale around here. Most of them get they were so susceptible to rust, along with those older Forerunners and everything, that you really got to be careful. And the FJ Cruisers, I've always kind of liked the looks of those, just for a interesting vehicle, but they tend to get rusted out pretty fast. Although in Colorado, if you can find one, in Arizona, Colorado, if it's lived there its whole life, you can get lucky sometimes.
You're absolutely right. There are areas of the country, like you said, where you don't have major rust or rot issues. Those are great places to try and find an older vehicle that's got a solid frame or a solid body, you know, and those are great vehicles to take on and do whatever minimal restoration you needs and have a reliable vehicle for God knows how long.
Yeah, there's a reason I still see 2000 to 2006 ish GMC trucks still running around with 300 or 400,000, and contractors, handymen using them still.
Yeah.
Uh, and
But
boy, there's other ones that are newer that are in the junkyard already.
they are. So when I advise friends and contemporaries on that General Motors, what they referred to as their C/K platform, 2006 was the last year of probably one of their best, model groups.
Yeah.
2006 was the final year for the Tahoes, Yukons, Suburbans before going to the new platform. So that was their, GMT 800 platform. In 2007, they went to their GMT 900 platform, and that's when things started declining. That was the first year that they went to a 6-speed transmission and a substantially larger amount of control modules. That's when things kind of really tipped for that, what GM still would consider their old flagship.
I know what I was going to ask you too. I noticed a trend in transmissions across the board where, and I've heard people claim, and I don't believe it. They claim that, all the new fluids are just so advanced they can handle all these crazy high temperatures and all these transmissions. And I see people with new Toyotas, new Tundras, Tacomas, whether it's, new GMCs, Fords, and they're all lacking transmission coolers. They're all running when they're towing, 240 to 280 degrees. And I'm just thinking that is going to fry that thing so fast. And my old Sequoia, it's a 2008, has an external cooler on it, which they removed in 2010. And that thing runs when I'm towing up the worst passes in the country. It'll run at 200 to 210 degrees max. So with a full load, full cargo, full trailer, everything. I don't know. What do you think about, I mean, is that just another cost cutting measure and just something that, hey, we can remove that external cooler and it saves us $15?
That's definitely a cost cutting measure. And that's probably one of the worst things you can actually do. Keeping these different fluids within a certain temperature range, I feel, is ideal for longevity. So the vehicles as a whole, from all manufacturers, have been moving in the direction of higher temperatures for both engine coolant, engine oil, transmission fluid, everything for many, many years. And one of the best things you can do for a vehicle is to make changes to those systems to bring all those temperatures down. Coolant temperature, ideally around 180, ideal. Transmission fluid around 160, 170, ideally. Engine oil, we need to get up past 212 degrees to try and remove moisture that accumulates in the oil, but we don't want the oil running that hot. We just want it to reach that temperature, and then we want to bring it back down, probably closer to, again, 180, 190, maybe 200 at the most. And we do that with aftermarket components. So larger coolers, but then also an inline thermostat for the lines that go to these coolers. Obviously, the engine has its own thermostat for the coolant, and it's easy to go to a thermostat operating range that's lower. But for the transmissions and engine oils, we have to go to the aftermarket to get an inline thermostat for those systems, which, if you're going to add a cooler to either, I highly recommend. That way those fluids can warm up to operating temperature without the cooler affecting temperature. And then once we've reached it, those thermostats will open and maintain our temperatures. In terms of those fluids, though, there has been actually a fair amount of improvement in quality of, for example, ATF, but the manufacturers are not really using them. For example, General Motors changed from Dextron 3, I believe they went up to H, to now Dextron 6. And just going to a semi-synthetic or a full synthetic was a good improvement. But there are transmission fluids that most of these manufacturers offer that they're not using in their vehicles. General Motors, for example, with their Allison division, their Allison transmissions, such as the 1000 series, that's a 6-speed. When Dextron 6 was available, they said, no, that fluid's not good enough. and they created their own subset of fluids. For example, the Allison TES 295 is somewhat of a variation of Dextron 6, but with actually improved aspects in several ways. So there are fluids that have been improved. They're just not being used. You have to go to the aftermarket, or like in GM, to an Allison grade fluid.
Okay. So they're better fluids, but not good enough to warrant the temperatures that they're allowing everything to run at.
That's correct. They should not be run at those higher temperatures. And like you said, something like an external cooler, really is something that they should invest the money in. Sadly, they're not. So as a customer or an owner of that vehicle, I recommend to everyone that's something that you should try and address. If you want to keep that vehicle, that's something simple you can do in addition to, more frequent service intervals that you can do to keep that vehicle going.
If you want to watch the full interview with Cello, click right here.